stay with us. Let's go to Tony Eastley from the G20 Media Centre in Brisbane, where Barack Obama is headed right now. Some very interesting moments in that speech, particularly, Tony, where it elicited applause from the crowd. That mention of climate change and also rights for gay and lesbian people around the world. What did you make of that?
Oh, look, what I make of it doesn't really matter, Jeremy, but with me is an expert on US studies, and that's Tom Switzer. He's from the US Studies Centre. I'd rather bring Tom in on it. Thanks very much. Look, Barack Obama said there's people sceptical about rebalancing what was going on with their pivot. Did he dispel that scepticism?
Look, I think he did, but you have to bear in mind I've been a strong supporter of the so-called pivot, which he announced in our federal parliament 3 years ago exactly. There have been a lot of sceptics, and it's largely because of American priorities in Ukraine, the Middle East, and of course the government shutdown last year that raised all sorts of doubts about the staying power of the United States. But in today's speech he made it quite clear that the United States was enhancing military engagement with many of its close allies.
You were right. You said Vietnam, Philippines, all before we were on air.
Right.
You nailed it in one.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the Vietnamese are very worried about the rise of China, and an old Cold War foe of the United States is clamouring for US security guarantees, and likewise the Philippines.
So is the US trying to play Vietnam and the Philippines off against China?
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, bear in mind, both Vietnam and the Philippines, although they have extensive trade relations with China, or at least the Philippines are starting to develop a trade relationship, they're very worried about an assertive China in their backyard.
It's curious because the US were in the Philippines years ago. I've been to the bases there. They closed down the Clark Air Base and the Subic Bay. So, but now they want to get back in.
That's exactly right. And I think this gets back to a key point, and this is the elephant in the room today, about the rise of China. Opinion varies among academics and journalists about the meaning of the rise of China. But if China rises the way that other great powers in world history have, it stands to reason that their definition of national interests will grow as their power and influence increases. And this is what the Americans are worried about. It's what Japan, South Korea, Thailand, which wasn't mentioned. Thailand was one of the 5 US security allies not mentioned today by the President, and of course countries like Vietnam.
Now, Barack Obama got a rock star welcome, a standing ovation. He got a standing ovation when he left. His speech was funny. It evoked Australianism. He talked about giving it a burl, Bris Vegas. He didn't miss a beat. But Tom Switzer, was there substance in that speech? Were you happy with outside of the hoopla?
Well, look, one of the key points he made was the fight against climate change, and this will get a lot of the media attention in the next 24 hours, as understandable as that is. But acting on climate change and mitigation, both in America and abroad, is a complicated process. And remember, we now have the Republicans controlling not just the House, but the Senate, and they're bound to stymie.
Has he got the power to do? You know, can he walk? He talks the talk? Yeah. Can he walk it as well?
Well, bear in mind, even when the President had Democrats controlling the Senate and the House, he couldn't even legislate a very modest climate bill, a cap and trade bill, what we call an emissions trading scheme that consisted of little but loopholes to the emitters. He couldn't even debate that in the Senate, much less pass it. He won't get Republican support for a cap and trade bill. He will, though, have the power of the executive to override Congress on some issues.
What about this $3 billion he's promised for keeping, what was it, Green Climate Fund?
This is the global climate fund, and the President has committed $3 billion. But
does he have to get Congress support?
Well, that's right. That $3 billion will have to come out of the foreign aid budget. If he hasn't got enough money to take out of the foreign aid budget, he will have to ask for existing sources from Congress to appropriate the funds. And the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill has made it quite clear that this policy that he's outlined is a job killer. And bear in mind, many Democrats who ran in the recent midterm elections distanced themselves from the President on the subject of big coal.
Tom Switzer from the US Studies Centre, thank you. I'm now going to go to my colleague.